Hey there, and welcome. Today, we're doing something I think is absolutely crucial, and honestly, pretty fascinating. We are taking a really dense regulatory document and breaking it down into a totally practical, plain English explainer. We're talking about the federal standards for managing hazardous waste. Now, if you've ever tried to read through environmental regulations and just felt completely overwhelmed by all the legal jargon, trust me, you're not alone and you are definitely in the right place. We're going to strip away all that complex terminology and just focus on what these rules actually mean for the day-to-day operations of a facility. So think of this presentation as your operational compass for environmental compliance. So I want you to start by thinking about a really big picture question. What actually keeps toxic waste from contaminating our communities? I mean, we all know industrial processes create dangerous byproducts, right? But why don't we see them spilling into our local drinking water or just seeping into our neighborhoods on a daily basis? Well, the answer isn't magic. It's actually a meticulously designed protective shield made up of really strict operational standards. The regulations we're unpacking today act as that exact barrier. They're basically the invisible, highly structured walls standing between dangerous materials and the environment that we all rely on. Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover who must follow these rules. Second, daily operations and safety standards. Third, preparing for facility emergencies. Fourth, closing down and financial backing. And finally, the high stakes of compliance. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, who must follow these rules? You know, if you're a professional just stepping into the world of operations or compliance, your very first job is basically figuring out, hey, did these massive regulatory frameworks even apply to my site? Because honestly, not every warehouse or factory is subject to these exact controls. The rules we're looking at apply to what are known as treatment, storage, or disposal facilities. In a nutshell, that means any operational site that actively processes hazardous materials, holds them for extended periods, or permanently gets rid of them. And I want to point out the word storage here. You might be thinking, well, we don't treat or bury chemicals, we just hold on to them for a bit before shipping them out. But actually, under these rules, even just holding on to certain hazardous wastes for long enough triggers full regulation. So if your facility fits into any of these buckets, you are heavily regulated. To really wrap our heads around the mindset required here, I love using the high security vault analogy. If you operate one of these facilities, there is absolutely no way you can just have an open lot. Your facility has to operate like a literal bank vault. Every single thing entering is strictly tracked, secured, and managed. And that perimeter security, it's not just a casual suggestion, it's a strict, non-negotiable legal requirement. You've got to have artificial or natural barriers, think high fences, and highly controlled entry points to keep unauthorized people and even local wildlife completely out of harm's way. Moving right along to Section 2, Daily Operations and Safety Standards. If you're a junior manager or a compliance officer, this right here is essentially your daily bread and butter. This is the operational checklist where the rubber really meets the road. First up, you have to chemically verify all incoming waste. And you do this so that you don't accidentally mix incompatible chemicals and cause some kind of disastrous reaction. Next, you check those perimeters and fences so that unknowing folks don't just wander into a hazardous zone. Then, you're inspecting equipment for leaks or rust so that you catch a dripping valve way before it turns into a massive soil contamination nightmare. And finally, you absolutely must thoroughly train your personnel within their first 6 months so that every single person on your team knows exactly how to handle these materials safely. Now, the regulations actually adapt depending on how you're physically holding the waste. Say you're storing waste in containers, like your standard 55-gallon drums. You're going to need ample aisle space. Why? Well, so your inspectors have enough room to walk between them and easily spot any leaks or corrosion. But if you're storing waste in massive industrial tanks, the rules totally shift. Tanks require serious structural integrity testing and secondary spill containment, like a big outer concrete basin. That's because if a massive tank suddenly ruptures, you absolutely need a secondary catch-all to prevent a catastrophic flood of toxic material from just rushing into the environment. You know, if there's a golden rule of environmental compliance, it's got to be this: trust but verify. You can never, ever just take someone's word for what's inside a drum that just arrived at your loading dock. The rules actually mandate that you must have a written waste analysis plan. Every single shipment has to be chemically analyzed before it ever crosses your threshold. You literally have to know the exact physical and chemical makeup of the waste to guarantee your facility is actually equipped to safely treat or store it. Which brings us to Section 3, Preparing for Facility Emergencies. Okay, but what happens when things don't go according to plan?
When those true worst-case scenarios happen, like sudden fires, explosions, or toxic gas releases, the law requires some very specific safety gear to be present and flawlessly maintained. You've got to have internal alarms or voice communication systems to instantly warn your staff. You need two-way radios or accessible phones to immediately summon local police, fire departments, or emergency response teams. You need portable fire extinguishers and spill control gear right there on hand. And you must have adequate water volume and pressure to supply your fire hoses. The whole intent here is super clear. If a disaster kicks off, your team has to be able to instantly communicate internally and get first responders on site without a single second of delay.
Let's see how all this gear builds into your emergency contingency plan, because this is the exact precise sequence of actions required by law when an emergency strikes. Step 1. You sound those internal alarms to protect your people. Step 2. You halt all operations and isolate the hazard immediately. Step 3. Notify local authorities and response teams. And Step 4. Actively work to prevent the hazardous material from spreading, meaning you contain that spill before it ever hits the soil or local surface water. It's a highly structured, step-by-step mandate specifically designed to contain chaos.
So who's actually orchestrating all of this? That would be the emergency coordinator. The regulations say there must be a designated, highly trained expert either on-site or immediately available on call. But here is the really critical part. This person must have the absolute authority to commit resources and shut down operations instantly. Seriously, when a toxic fire breaks out, the emergency coordinator cannot be wasting time calling some corporate office in another state to ask for budget approval or permission to hit the kill switch. They must have the unmitigated power to act immediately to protect human health.
All right, moving to Section 4, closing down and financial backing.
Listen, your environmental responsibilities, they don't just magically vanish because a facility stops making money or shuts its doors for good. The rules enforce what we can basically call a leave no trace standard. This is known as the closure performance standard. When operations wrap up, you can't just lock the gates and walk away. The facility has to be fully, completely decontaminated. The entire goal here is to eliminate any need for future maintenance and to make absolutely sure that toxic leachate doesn't slowly escape into the groundwater years or even decades later. You've got to clean it up so incredibly well that it never threatens the environment again.
If we map out this chronological journey, it really reveals a true life cycle of accountability. First, you've got your active operations with all those rigorous daily safety checks. Then, when it's time to shut down, you enter safe decontamination, which means scrubbing down equipment and removing contaminated soils. After that comes certified closure, where independent experts actually come in to verify that you did the cleanup correctly. And finally, for certain disposal facilities, there's post-closure care. And this is pretty wild. It means a company might actually be required to monitor the groundwater around the site for decades after it closes, specifically to protect future generations from slow-moving leaks.
And that brings us to the financial reality of running one of these sites. $1 million. That is the absolute minimum liability coverage required per sudden accidental occurrence. You have to be able to prove that you have the financial backing, whether that's through insurance, trust funds, or bonds, to protect third parties from bodily injury or property damage if a sudden accident does happen. Basically, the government wants to ensure that if you make a terrible mistake that harms the community, you actually have the cash on hand to pay for the damage.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, the high stakes of compliance. Up until now, we've talked a lot about the how and the what to do, but now let's look at the what if. Here is the bottom line. Ignoring these operational standards isn't just some minor administrative oopsie. It results in extreme financial liability, catastrophic danger to the surrounding community, and completely forced facility shutdowns. So if you're that 24-year-old professional out there maintaining the daily operating record, please remember this. Your meticulous daily record keeping, your routine inspections of fences and tanks, your strict adherence to the waste analysis plan, that is the primary defense against these catastrophic outcomes. Your paperwork quite literally protects the environment.
So I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Take a really close look at the operations you manage or oversee right now, and ask yourself, are your daily operational protocols strict enough to protect your community's future generations? Because compliance isn't just annoying red tape. It is the active, daily practice of keeping our world safe. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this explainer on hazardous waste management standards. Keep learning, stay vigilant out there, and I'll catch you next time.
If you found this helpful or want to stay updated when this regulation changes, subscribe and support the channel. And if you need the full technical details on this CFR, click the link in the description below. See you next time.